Welcome, everybody, to Embodied. Today we have with us a very special guest, Simon Alexander Ong. I've known Simon for, it's going over 12 years now. And interestingly, we were brought together through a mutual friend of ours to explore the space of Napoleon Hill's mastermind concept. It's been spectacular watching how from one mastermind group, Simon has moved from strength to strength without fail. Not only does he inspire me as a coach with his tenacity and unquenchable thirst for life, but seeing him step so fearlessly into marriage, fatherhood, and authorship has been just incredible to watch as well. All these aspects combined really hold you in high regard for me, and in my opinion are the makings of a truly embodied man. Now, I know that everything you do is built to energize people, hence the title of your book. To see the world differently and to awaken their imagination of what is truly possible so that they can live a better story. So firstly, welcome. And speaking into this, I would love to know, everybody would love to know, what inspired you to embark on this journey of becoming a coach?
Sure. Well, first of all, hello, Tobias. Hello, Massimo. And thank you for the very kind introduction to myself and my background. So I guess I'll give a quick overview of what inspired me to embark on this journey, and then we can dive and I guess dissect that more into different areas. So I was born here in the United Kingdom to Malaysian Chinese parents. I grew up with the mistaken belief now in hindsight that success was determined by my job title. Be a banker, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an accountant. And so after college, I went to university to study economics, and I chose the banking route. I decided to start in the world of finance in the middle of 2007, which was probably the worst time to start in that industry, because you have to remember this was a year before the global financial crisis of 2008. And also the company I started my career with was Lehman Brothers, which collapsed into bankruptcy 14 months after I joined. Now, admittedly, in the moment, it was a very painful experience to have that taken away from you little over a year after graduating from university. But in hindsight, it was a wonderful blessing in disguise, because it kickstarted, if you will, the longest journey that I believe us humans make, which is the inches from our heads to our hearts. Never an easy one, but the most important and fulfilling that we will ever embark on. And so that experience got me questioning what success was for me. I quickly realized actually that we are exhausted, not because we're doing too much, but because we're doing too little of the things that make us feel alive, that bring us joy, and because we are very often running somebody else's race. And so for me to step back and ask myself questions such as, what did success mean to me? What sort of impact did I want to have in the world? It was an eye-opening exercise, because I never had this opportunity before to really sit down and evaluate my life, and to really go deep inside to understand what was my own definition of these things that I just took for given from society, from parents, from colleagues and students around me. And so that kind of led me into the entrepreneurial world. I saw that as long as I was working for someone, my paycheck, my bonus, my title would be determined by other people. So there was only so much that I could do when I was working for someone. And so I got curious about the world of business. Well, if I worked for myself, I could have a bigger impact, not just on the people I could serve, but also on my own journey and trajectory. And so I got stuck into the business world, followed my curiosities, had two failed businesses early on in terms of ideas I had before I started to explore coaching. And it's interesting because I think coaching was always there. I've always enjoyed helping other people. And I think a lot of that comes from my mum, who unfortunately passed away when I was 17. She was a nurse before she was a housewife. And so she had a high degree of empathy and connection with those around her. And so I think that was always within me somewhere. And so when I had the opportunity to explore that, I was really excited. You know, I started coaching individuals And it was a couple of years after I started, I got to meet Massimo in the mastermind group. And from there, that's when the roller coaster really began, because as I immersed myself in it, as I directed 100% of my energy to that which I was passionate about, it was like I was ripping open this portal to a world of opportunity. And so I then got invited to speak. I got invited to do brand partnerships with the likes of Unilever, Salesforce, Google, Canon, Virgin, and so on. And more recently, one of the positives out of the COVID pandemic, apart from becoming a father for the first time, was landing a book deal with the world's largest publishing house. And so one of the greatest lessons I took from that is we all know what our next step is in life or whatever journey we're on. We just have to discover the courage to take it.
That speaks directly to me, because I think courage is one of the most important spaces to be able to step into in terms of our resonance as well. It's really the place where things start moving and getting that momentum back into flow.
I think also like courage, like we were speaking with Anastasia Gorali, like a wealth evangelist just last week, and she was highlighting this as well, that we just need like courage and faith when we start, and then like as we go the path, then we can look back and see like, cool, actually I can trust myself, you know, and suddenly have a track record. And so yeah, the path forward, and I think you said something interesting, you know, the journey from the head to the heart. And maybe we can speak more into this, like what does this transformation look like to you, and what, like, how does it correlate with the things that energize us?
Sure. So I think in society we have this belief that we are only productive if we're doing something. You know, I've got to be hustling, or I've got to be in motion. I've got to be putting myself out there 24/7 in order to feel productive. And so what has happened in the in traditional companies is we get measured by our ability to have face time. How often are you in the office? How many hours have you put in? That has often determined whether we get promoted or not. But for me, in order to actually feel energized, we've got to understand the importance of intentional rest, that actually being is just as productive as doing. And so when I spoke about this journey from my head to our heart, for me, it's very important, because what it embodies is reconnecting ourselves to that inner wisdom, that inner child, those inner desires, which we can so often forget when we're caught up with the everyday. And that's what it embodies for me. It's really meeting ourselves back with who we truly are. Because what happens is, as we grow older, we pile all these layers on top of us in terms of what other people want from us, what they expect of us, living a life for others, that we forget who we truly are. And so in regards to this journey, it's really peeling away all those layers, kind of like if you've ever seen the film Inception by Christopher Nolan, in which they go a dream within a dream within a dream. It's kind of like going through that process where you go right to the core of who you are, and you allow space for that person to begin to flourish and show up in the world. And that's why it's the longest journey, because many of us don't make that journey. Many of us don't embark on it. But when we do, as you said, Tobias, once we start to build that momentum, once we begin to see how powerful and strong we really are, that is when we begin to savor life and the beauty that is all around us.
I'm just thinking about a lot of the clients that I work with, and equally the clients that I'm sure come to you. You know, in terms of actioning something out and executing something, those are usually very difficult points for people to actually start embarking on. So how would you guide people struggling in that execution phase to actually really look at their lives and try and sort of step up and make that change? What would you say to them? How would you sort of entice them into that space?
Sure. Well, I think before we can consider execution and action, we've got to understand ourselves first. Because if you're just doing action for action's sake, it's not going to last, because it requires you to push yourself. It's like saying, well, I know I've got to go and exercise on a regular basis in order to feel fit. But if you're just focused on the action without understanding why you're taking the action, then that's only going to last so long. And it's why people rarely keep up New Year's resolutions. And so the step before action, I think, is understanding yourself. And that's why a lot of people would say understanding yourself is the beginning of true wisdom. And so for me, what I get many of my clients to do is to embrace the activity of journaling. In fact, journaling is the cheapest form of therapy, because what you're doing when you journal, and it's important to journal with pen and paper, not with typing or on the laptop or iPad, but just traditional old school pen and paper. Because when you journal pen to paper, you are forcing your mind to slow down and to think about what you're going to write. And as you write down your thoughts onto paper, you are in the process of organizing your thoughts, questioning your thoughts, and out of that comes some clarity. So as you begin to understand your thoughts at a deeper level, you then understand what action is important as a result of that. So you're not just focused on action for action's sake, but you're focused on aligned action, which I think is very different from just taking any action. So when you take action, which is aligned to who you are and where you want to be, then there is more motivation to do so, because you feel that by taking that step, you're going to be pulled forward to a vision that you have in your mind.
Very nice.
Yeah, I love what you say with like the writing that brings clarity. And I mean, actually, it's interesting, I think, also like into you writing a book. Because I mean, like any process of writing is that sort of like organizing of thoughts, like how do I see the world? Like what are the frameworks that I'm using to make sense of what's unfolding around me?
Definitely. I think the process of what, I mean, for anybody who's written a book, actually, that they can relate, is that when you write a book, it's actually also a process of understanding yourself, because it forces you to reflect on your own life, how far you've come, the challenges you face, the lessons you've learned. And in the book, actually, I reference a story of somebody I had the pleasure of interviewing, a lady called Diana Chow, who is based in California. And she delivered a TED talk based on her experience of being near death multiple times. In fact, she was only saved by her brother catching her on one of her suicide attempts, that she promised herself she would never bring her brother down with her into this dark place. And that's when she sought refuge in writing. And so in her TED talk, she talks about how she started the world's largest youth for youth nonprofit called Letters to Strangers. And in this, she said something profound to me. She said that writing is humanity distilled into ink. Writing is humanity distilled into ink, because by putting ink to paper, what we're doing is we're understanding the humanity behind our exterior, which actually very few of us do. Very few of us actually process our experience of life in such a manner. But when you do so, it actually gives you greater clarity as to your purpose, your being, and what is important to you.
I agree completely, but I guess what I'm always sort of met with when it comes to, let's say, for instance, we could generalize it across the population, is that there's a lot of resistance to change in general. And I guess it's, what do we draw on as the motivating factor to actually really step up to that space? It's like, I think one of the quotes that you rightfully point out, when I've read a lot of your writing, is that, you know, coaching is a question of whether you want to do it or whether you don't want to do it. And there's that big divide. So what is really that thing that prompts us to kind of go, yeah, I really need to change something here?
I mean, the short answer is that for many of us, we don't actually want to change until we have faced something tragic, or we face something that has completely changed the way we see the world. So, for example, if you've had a loss in the family that was unexpected, suddenly you now truly understand the fragility of life, and your desire to want to take action has heightened. Or if you've lost a job, suddenly you want to do something different. As in my case, you know, when the financial crisis happened and I was out of a job after 14 months, I knew something had to change. This is the unfortunate reality for many of us. You know, we wait until something tragic, or we've lost something, or we faced a big change in our lives that means we got no choice but to change. So what we have to do if we want to change, and do keep in mind this is important to distinguish between wanting to change and wishing to change. If you want to make that bridge between wishing to wanting to change, you've got to reflect on what would life be like if you didn't change your current scenario. How would you feel if your current scenario played out for the rest of your life, how would you feel? So you've got to picture the alternatives sometimes, because so often we're looking at just the positives. We're looking at, well, put this visualization together, imagine all the happy moments, imagine what you can do, imagine all the possibilities, which is great. But often it's pain that drives us to change. And so by picturing the opposite, well, what would I feel like if I didn't change a single thing about my life right now, and I'm in the same place 10 years from now? How would I feel? Would I be happy? Would I actually look back with regret, or would I look back with a smile that I took action? So you want to amplify that pain in your mind that would challenge you to take action, because the truth is, if you just focus on the positive, that's not going to be enough for you to take action. If it was, then all of us would follow through with our New Year's resolutions on the back of the high of a new year. But we don't, because there's not that urgency or that pain to want to make a different decision.
And I think that leads us towards the whole magic of sort of like changing your energy. Because I think what you're highlighting on the way, there's like the positive, but then there's also kind of the pain and the darkness. And so there's, I think this, or what I'm hearing is this sort of like alchemical process. You got to really like go into the darkness in order to like bring something forth that you can then make into light. But I'd love to get more into like the title of your book being Energize. And, we titled this conversation here kind of the magic of changing your energy. And so what are kind of the things to heighten that internal energy of basically feeling turned on for life, rather than just like, yeah, cool.
Sure. So when I think about energy, I mean, energy for me is life force. Now, in the Maori culture, they call it mana. In my Chinese culture, they call it chi. In Star Wars, they call it the force. Whatever we are describing or naming it, we're all referring to the same thing, which is energy. And the way I see it is that energy it's a universal language, yet it has no words, but you and I can feel it. When you walk into a room, you can feel the energy of a room. When you meet two individuals, you'll feel attracted more to one than the other simply because of their energy, before they've uttered a single word. Now, we all have this life force within us. The question is, how are we using it in order to channel it to what is most important? And so when I think about energy, what contributes to our level of energy is our physical, our mental, our spiritual, and emotional. These are the factors that contribute to our overall well-being. Now, the physical is something we all know. It's the most obvious. It's the most visible in terms of getting sufficient rest, feeding your body right, moving your body. But it's the latter, the mental, the emotional, spiritual, which aren't so obvious. And just to give an example of one exercise I often get clients to do to amplify their energy immediately, is the power of intentional gratitude. Now, notice I've used the word intentional before gratitude, and I've used it for a reason, because I think that we've got to a point in society where gratitude is becoming very superficial. It's like, write 3 things you're grateful for at the end of the day: the sun, I got a new client, and my wife's happy today. And so we just do it with no intention. We just simply write it down. Next day, write another 3 things down, that we don't actually feel the depth of its power. So when I mean gratitude with intention, here's a great exercise we can all do. The first is to write down the name of somebody that you can be grateful for that has impacted your life in whatever way to who you are today. It could be a family member, a partner, a colleague, a friend, a child. Whoever it is that comes to your mind, write the name of that person down. Second is to write down, why did you choose that person? In what ways did they shape you into who you are today? What would life be without them? And in what way specifically have they created the impact that you are now having on other people's lives? And you want to be as specific as you can in this part here. You want to bring to life the impact they've had on your life. The third step is where the magic happens. You pick up your phone, you call that person, and you read out everything you wrote down. Slowly but purposefully, read it out to that person and simply notice what you notice. Now, when I often do this with clients, or when I do it with groups of people, they go through an emotional roller coaster when they do this, because what's happening is you are now feeling the depths of gratitude in that moment. You're being intentional with the gratitude. You're not just running it down in a quick 10-second exercise and then brushing it off and going to something else. You are slowing down, being intentional, and you are tapping into something that Pam Grout, the author of Thank and Grow Rich, wrote, which is that gratitude is the gateway drug to abundance. You begin to realize just how much you already have in front of you. And this is why gratitude changes a meal into a feast, strangers into friends, and a home into a palace. Because when you understand just how much you really have, you open your mind to the fact that anything is possible.
That's such a beautiful exercise, because I think when, as you're talking, I'm kind of sort of reflecting on myself and who are the people that I would send that sort of gratitude out. And I guess in sort of therapeutic practice, you kind of reach that point of looking at all or every person that you've encountered life as serving you for the best, right? Whichever way, good, bad, ugly. And yet, when you do focus on someone who potentially there's a little resistance towards the last part that you were pointing out there, really pick up the phone and actually call them and tell them everything. There's almost this sort of sensation of like, oh, there's a little bit of work that still needs to be done there in sort of adjusting one's karma a little bit. It's a beautiful exercise. Really, really nice.
It's fantastic. And I think that, it's not just in our personal life it can help, but it's also in our professional lives. I often get asked, Massimo, well, that's all great, but how do I apply that in a practical way to my professional life? And I say, well, when you receive great service, when you receive a fantastic experience from somebody, whether that's a business, a team, or an individual, express your gratitude. Express your gratitude, because what you will realize is that you are adding to this sort of karmic field, if you will, which will return this stuff to you in abundance. It may not be immediate, but it will come in due course. And it's trusting that universal process. I mean, a great example is when I was running an event here in London pre-COVID. And I asked the organizer if I could use the venue, because I was running my own event and I wanted to host it at their site. And I said to her, could you let me know how much it costs to rent this site out and to have it for this day on a weekend? And she said to me in a reply, don't worry, Simon, it's on us. We haven't forgotten the hamper that you bought us for Christmas 2 years ago.
Oh, wonderful.
And it was a simple act of gratitude, of expressing thanks for the opportunity they had for me to speak. And it made me realize not many of us actually express thanks in our professional lives. By doing so, we already separate ourselves from the majority, but it's also just part of being grateful. We're thanking other people for the fact that they thought of us. They considered us for an opportunity that could have gone to someone else. And for me, it's very simple, but it does wonders for how you relate to other people.
Yeah, the act of gratitude. It's just so beautiful, because it also, I think it requires that level of vulnerability where you open yourself up. And I feel that's when you were speaking really came through for me, that so often it's this kind of like armored upness in a way of like showing a facade rather than actually, coming open hearted and saying, hey, you actually really changed my life, and recognizing that we are all interconnected rather than sort of like an island.
Definitely.
Yes, I am who I am because of you, and like all the experiences that led me here today.
Definitely. You mean, when I'm often asked about what was my favorite part of the book, I mean, of course, all of it is, but one of my favorite parts was the acknowledgement section, because when I wrote the acknowledgement section, it really demonstrated that I am not where I am just because of myself. I am where I am because of the many people who have influenced me in my journey. Everybody from Massimo here and the rest of the Mastermind group, to mentors and coaches I've had, to my wife, to my daughter, to my parents, to my family, to the colleagues I've had. Everybody has had a role to play in the success I've had today. And so it made me realize we never get to the top alone. And if that is true, we have to be very careful about how we treat others. We have to treat others in the same way we would want to be treated. And for me, it is a team effort. It's a team effort. When when I look at the relationship I have with my wife, I get lots of people telling me, well, what are some of your tips for me when I'm just entering a relationship? Because I've been with my wife since 2007 now. So, it's a long time I've been with my wife. And I always say to those who are early in relationships or just getting into a serious relationship is you've got to see yourself as a team. You've got to see yourself as a team. Because so often what causes friction and tension in a relationship is when one wants to be right and sort of prove the other wrong. And this is ego speaking. This is ego causing destruction. Whereas if we can travel from ego to humility and understand we don't know everything, we're only one person in this world of 10 or so billion people, and we're only one person seeing the world in one particular way, that actually we come together as a team, and my success is our success, her success is our success, and that's how it should be.
I'm so glad you've gone into this sort of relationship space, and I think Toby is also. We were talking about it beforehand, that the relationship in how you see this as well is super important. And when I'm thinking about couples coming together, and you and Laurie are awesome as a couple. Especially, just kind of watching how you guys are supporting each other all the time. And I guess my question is, you're both in a way on your own trajectories in terms of what you want to achieve. How do you both align that so that it's really going in the same direction, if that makes sense?
Sure. Well, you're right, Massimo. I think we both have different things that we want to accomplish in our respective businesses. Where we align is our values and our vision. So when we sit down and put together a vision, it's not just a vision for our professional life, but it's also a vision for our personal lives. And we also discuss what our values are. So for me, it's, yes, I want to be successful in what I do, but I also want to spend time with my wife and daughter. And so when we openly speak about these values and vision, we can see where we can help one another, or where we're not so good at, or where we need some help with. And I think that latter part, asking for help, is so important, because so often, especially when we are men in a relationship, we kind of think that we can do it all. We don't need to ask for help. We can do it all alone. But I've realized a lot that by opening up more to Laurie, then it gives her an understanding of how she can help me as an individual, and vice versa. When she opens up and tells me, Simon, I'm going through this at the moment, or this is challenging for me at the moment being a mother, then it gives me information of how I can help her as well to be a better husband. And so I think it's very important to have these open communication channels, because again, when we look at relationships that break down, it's a breakdown of communication. Fundamentally, it's a breakdown of communication. You fail to understand one another, or you've lost the understanding of one another because for whatever reason that level of communication has deteriorated.
I really love this whole relationship piece. And you spoke about prana and life force, and in the context of energizing your life, what role do you see your relationship plays in the sense of maybe creating stability, or also last week we were speaking with Tyson Adams, who was speaking a lot about sexual energy transmutation. Are these also components that kind of flow into your concept of energizing your life?
Absolutely, because you can't think of energy without love. I mean, love is the highest form of energy there is in the world, in all forms. I mean, love in terms of relationships, love in terms of a cause. People would fly to the other side of the world for a particular cause because they love it. They will march in the streets in the depths of winter for a cause, and that's love. So I think love is the highest form of energy there is. And when you talk about relationships, there's a great blog title by the author Ryan Holiday. And the title of one of his blogs says that your life partner is the greatest life hack that nobody told you about. And that is because when we speak about our environment, about the energy and environment that we spend our time in, we all talk about the 5 people you spend most of your time with, but actually the person that you spend most of your time with is your partner. I mean, he or she is the person that you are going to be spending the most of your time with. And so selecting a partner, being with someone who is supportive of you, your ambition, your thoughts, your strengths, every part of you, is so important. When I look at couples that inspire me, it's got to be the Ginsburg family. I don't know if you follow the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but the relationship she had with Marty, her husband, is insanely inspirational about the sacrifices they both made for each other. It wasn't just one sacrificing for the other. It wasn't one way. It was very much about equality. He sacrificed for her, she sacrificed for him. And without each other, they wouldn't have achieved half the things they did. Ruth once said outside of Congress that if it wasn't for Marty, she wouldn't have got the role that she did at the highest echelons of the legal profession. And that's because Marty was her cheerleader. When she didn't have the extroversion to go out and champion her name to be considered at the highest levels, Marty was the one working the relationships, telling people that they had to consider her nomination. And so for me, that couple is a beautiful demonstration of the power of love energy and what it can unleash in a relationship.
It's an amazing example, and I think it's a good practice, I think, for couples to actually start looking outwards at inspiring couples and seeing how they can actually bring that energy back into their relationship.
Yeah.
And just I guess focusing on this word inspiration, I can see how much Laurie inspires you, and I can imagine it's the other way around as well. And something that I also have to comment on is when I've seen you both together and the manner in which you speak about your wife as well, you're both feet in. Whereas I think we kind of live in this day and age where it's sort of 1 foot in and one is kind of waiting to see if there's a bit of an exit strategy. When you're navigating sort of difficult moments in that space, because every relationship has difficult moments, and I think it's that tension that really tests us to stay together or not. How do you, or at least what do you draw on to keep you inspired and constantly stepping and leaning towards her?
Sure. Well, first of all, Massimo, I think that's a great question because every relationship has its ups and downs. I still have arguments with Laurie. We still have our challenges. It's just part of being in a team. It's part of being in a relationship. But when we do have those moments, because of the way we are now and the way we think, the duration that they last for is actually very short now, because we automatically understand that we're both coming from a good place. We may not be processing it the same way or coming up with a similar solution, but we're both coming from a good place. And so by understanding that, we can give more space to each other to be heard. But then, as you said, Massimo, to keep motivated, to remain inspired, it's to simply remind ourselves why we're doing what we're doing. At the moment, it's because of our child, Sienna. She inspires and motivates us to be the best parents we can for her. So when we do have those moments in which we don't always agree on, we just remind ourselves, well, what do we want to teach Sienna? What lessons do we want to pass on to her? And that just helps to bring us back into a more rational space of thinking and to just open up a bit more and not to let the emotions take over. Because I think whenever you get into those moments in a relationship, emotions can very quickly take over. Now, with greater awareness, you are able to then pause, step back, and just manage and master your emotions better. Because if you can't, again, that is another contributor to breakdowns in relationships.
It's interesting what you say with the emotions, because like what I'm often seeing is that actually like these moments of like conflict which stir up emotion are actually the ones that provide the fuel for kind of the next evolution. So it creates this little bit of a rupture for which new light can come in that makes something new blossom in a way.
Definitely. And that's why I said, even though I've touched on ways that we can manage emotion in those moments of arguments, of tension can actually be healthy as well if we look at the positives. It's like any challenge or setback in life. If you have a challenge or setback, of course, there'll be some negatives, but at the same time, there's also positives, such as the lesson you learn or the opportunity you would have had if it didn't happen. You wouldn't have had. And so with us, when there is that tension, then what that raises is questions on how we can better understand one another. Because then I might think, well, it didn't work when I said it this way to her. How different could I say it next time? or how do I need to present it, or do I need to think about something before I say that? And so it actually deepens our awareness of our communication between each other.
But you're also highlighting something super important there, that it's the stepping back into that tension. And I think a lot of people want the tension to stop. It's especially men. I mean, look, I speak from an unevolved space as well, where it's whenever you're met with that sort of feminine tension, that or that force that comes at you, it's almost like I don't really want to endure that space. Whereas you said something super important too, and it's the idea of intentionality. And what is my intention in actually being in the space with my partner? It's not hurting her, it's not belittling her, making her crumble at her core, all these different things. And I think when both parties in that couple recognize the intentionality is in a good space, it almost kind of separates the two. You have intentionality and you have emotion. And that goes to what you were saying about emotion, that you're able to sort of revisit every single time and address it differently.
And just sort of looping back to energy, for me, what I've learned is that as we understand our partners better, we can actually prevent a lot of that happening simply by understanding them at a deeper level. So, for example, if I get back and I haven't seen Laurie for a whole day, and I notice some changes in the way she is. Now, before I go and say my piece about my own day, about what I've been up to, I might simply take her to one side and say, tell me about your day. And I just shut up. And I just let her pour out whatever happened, because I had a sense that there was something amiss. And so giving her the space to empty what's on her mind means that when I do get to share how my day went, she can receive it in a much more loving way than if I just came out straight at her without noticing that she wasn't in the right space to receive that information.
Yeah.
I think also something that has come up a few times is this whole piece around masterminding. And now we basically talked about our partner being like this is super important part of our environment. But then you also mentioned Napoleon Hill and the mastermind group that you were part of, or are still part of. And so I'm curious to hear from your perspective, like, how does sort of that environment of aligned people bring forth more energy and courage and faith and inspiration? What are you drawing from these spaces?
Sure. Well, for me, the energy comes in two ways. The first is in terms of the level of thinking that we possess, and the second is in terms of our creative energy. So I'll give an example for each. With regards to the energy of our thinking, I remember when I first went to this mastermind that was organized by a mutual friend of Masterminding. And you have to keep in mind at that time that I joined, I was still in a full-time job. I left work early in order to get to that first mastermind that was organized. And I was blown away by the introductions of some of these individuals, what they were doing, what they were accomplishing, and just the level that they were thinking at. And regardless of what happened after that first evening, I went away having my goals taken out of the realm of just being big and ignited to galactic. And that's the energy I'm speaking about. It's the energy of possibility. What for me were aspirational habits were normal habits to these people. Getting up early, prioritizing your health, managing your thoughts better. These were their standard habits. And so for me, I very quickly adopted many of these habits as my minimum. So this is what I mean. The first real impact is elevating the energy of your thinking. Literally, it can happen instantaneously as soon as you are immersed in that sort of environment. The second is creative energy. So I've been in a number of masterminds since that first one. And with each mastermind, there's been a range of ages, difference in industries, experiences, backgrounds, locations. And that for me is where innovation and creativity is born. Because if we always spend time around the same people and only look at our competition, we can only be as good as our competition, which isn't that great. It's not going to be very innovative if you're only as good as your competition. But when you look outside of your industry and consider people from different age groups and backgrounds, then suddenly your mind just ignites with this creative juices on overflow. And so for me, I've been lucky to be mentored by someone who's a 12-year-old entrepreneur to somebody who's a 65-year-old entrepreneur. Now, what I learned from each will be very different, of course, because they've had very different life experiences. But that then just ignites my own creativity. A good example to illustrate this is somebody I met from Mastermind I've been involved with here in London, is the brains behind the world's best bar for 2 years in a row at the Connaught Hotel in Mayfair. Now,
Amazing.
by being exposed to this individual who is doing some incredible work, I mean, his personal brand is huge in the hospitality industry. Now, many in the public would never have heard of him, but within the hospitality industry, his name is massive. I mean, when you're running the world's best bar, of course, people are going to be looking up to you. And so that gave me the inspiration to come together with him and say, well, imagine if he could design a cocktail to mark the launch of my book. Now, that's what I call creative thinking, because it's not the same as most people launching a book. They wouldn't be able to do the same sort of stunt, if you will. But by exposing our mind to diversity of thinking, it elevates the energy of our creativity. So those are two things for me that have really been opened through the power of masterminding, is the energy of our thinking being elevated and our creative energy just being ignited.
I think,
love that.
dude, I'm also blown away like you, Toby. It's also, I think, something that really shines through for me is that ability of yours to come from such a humble place and let's call it asking for that connection with that person. And I think there's so many people that are out there that struggle with that ability to just ask.
No, it is a challenge for many others, but I think that when you ask, when you have the courage to ask and not be attached to the outcome, I think that part's important, because the reason why many of us don't ask is because we already feel the pain of rejection before we've even asked. And so that theoretical pain of rejection means that we avoid the ask in the first place. But for me, I've got to a point, and agreed some of this takes practice, but I've got to a point where I literally don't care if they say no or not. You know, because as soon as I send a message out or a voice note out or arrange a meeting, it goes straight into my archives unless they respond. Now, it goes straight into my archive so I can manage my messages in a cleaner way. And if they respond, it comes back into my inbox. I'm like, great, now we have a conversation. So with any sort of asks, it's very much a numbers game. The more you ask, the more chances that it's going to be yes. But more importantly, the more confident you get to ask that next ask or request. And even Steve Jobs said in a famous interview that very few people pick up the phone and ask. And when he was learning how to build computers and learn how to put these things together, he literally called up the CEO of Hewlett Packard at the time and asked for any spare parts he had. Because he wanted to build his own computer and he wanted to build all these things, but he never had the parts. So he literally just picked up the phone to these CEOs and said, by the way, can I have some spare parts if you have any? And he said the relationships he started building as a young Steve Jobs was incredible. He just thought everybody did it, but he realized very few people actually pick up the phone and ask for help or for advice in anything. And if you don't, the answer will always be no.
We leak so much energy in comparing ourselves to other people, and I loved one of your articles that you wrote about comparisonitis. If I got that title right, it's such a great word you came up with. How do you feel, or at least maybe some pointers for people to dismantle that necessity to compare oneself to others?
Yeah. Well, what happens in society at the moment is that we are bombarded by comparison. The very fact that many of us are using social media means that we can't help but compare our lives to other people. You will have experienced logging onto your Instagram or Facebook and seeing somebody's holiday photos and maybe wishing that you were on holiday when you saw those photos pop up in your newsfeed. Now, all that does to us is it takes our energy away from focusing on our own journey. And I get a question often that says, well, Simon, shouldn't I look at other people and what they're doing and the success they're having? I said, of course, do. But what I'm trying to tell you here is not to compare yourself. Be inspired by them, yes. Try and understand how they did what they do, yes. But don't compare yourself to where they're at. Instead, if you are going to compare yourself to anything, compare yourself to who you were yesterday. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, because the most important goal for us, regardless of where we are at in our life or what our journey is, where our journey is taking us, the most important goal is simply to be better than who we were yesterday. Because if you are better than who you were yesterday, even just a little bit each day, imagine who and where you could be 365 days from now. That is a powerful thought to imagine. And we tend to forget that we just have to take one step forward each day. And that accumulates to 365 steps forward. But every time we compare, we stop chances for us to do so, because we're spending time worried about other people's lives instead of putting all that energy into our own. Now, for me, if I'm going to look at other people, and I do because I think it's a great way to learn, instead of getting caught up in comparing myself to others, I love to, and I'm going to use the word codify, I love to codify how they go about doing what they do. So I remember when my wife and I attended our very first Tony Robbins event here in London. And most people in the crowd were lapping up the content. And, I guess you could call some of these individuals Tony Robbins junkies. So I remember speaking to one, and she said, "Oh, this is my 10th event I've been on." And it just got me thinking, well, I wonder how much you put into action if it's your 10th event. And what I did is I didn't focus on consuming the content, because I knew a lot of what he was speaking about already. For me, my attention in my notebook was codifying how he did what he did, i.e., how did he begin his talk? How did he end his talk? What stories did he use? How did he tell the stories? At what points did he walk into the audience? Why did he walk into the audience? How did he create energy in a room at the points he needed it? And how did he get an entire room of people to run to the back of the room to sign up for his next program? So I was trying to codify how he was doing it. And so that, for me, is a much more productive way of looking at other people. If you're inspired by someone, seek the lessons in what they're doing so that you yourself can apply them. That is going to be infinitely more productive than looking at them and saying, "Why not me? I wish I had what he or she had." That's never productive, because it's just going to keep you paralyzed by overthinking.
And also sort of consumed with the deficit that's in your life, right?
Definitely. We're all born different for a reason. And when you look at people for inspiration, what you're really doing is you're treating that experience like a buffet table. You're picking elements from different books, different seminars, different people, different videos, and then you're mixing it into your own philosophy, if you will, by what resonates most with you. And so there'll be elements from one person that sort of impacts the way I do business. There'll be elements from someone else that influences how I present on stage. And so by taking all these ingredients and mixing into your own recipe, that's how you create your unique signature.
Very nice.
I think it also comes back to this sort of like masterminding piece, interestingly, where you're suddenly around people that inspire you. And it's not just like consuming it on screen, but being around and having that proximity already. And it's at least been for me the experience of like being in masterminds where you suddenly build these like, as you say, these beautiful bonds that nothing ever could bring you when you just like search someone on the internet. But it's like, wow, what's the deep energy that drives that specific person?
Definitely. And it's interesting. I mean, we're talking about masterminds, and I get questions sometimes from people that attend my talks and say, "Well, Simon, you have had the opportunity to be in some incredible masterminds. Well, what about me? What if I can't access these individuals and I can't hang around with a CEO, or I can't hang around with an entrepreneur who's making six figures?" And I say to them, you don't have to begin there. You don't have to begin there. If you think you've got to begin there, you can put a lot of pressure on yourself to wait until you've got those relationships. You can begin right now by employing a method that even I still do today, which is curate your own MBA. Now, what I mean by an MBA is a mental board of advisors. So for me, I will have, say, 6 people, dead or alive, in my boardroom. And when I face challenges or I need help and I don't have immediate access to people in physical form or on the internet for whatever reason, I would simply shut my eyes, go into my mind, walk into my boardroom, pull out my chair, sit down, look at these 6 individuals in the face and share my question or challenge with them and just seek their counsel. Listen to what each of them will share. And the purpose of this is really to awaken your understanding that there is always a different way to see what you're going through. There is always a different way to see it. And by people taking on those roles, whoever they are, dead or alive, it just gives you a more fun experience of hearing that wisdom.
I love that. That's awesome.
Maybe as we're coming to the end, Simon, I just wanted to draw your attention to Faz's comment here in the comment section. That the experience that you have with your wife made her cry, and she's she would love a man at this stage that you are at. So some kudos to your development here.
Well, Faz, thank you so much for the kind words.
Simon, in relation to people finding you, finding your book, give us a little bit of insight where everyone can go with that. I know we've got everything written in terms of links, but if you could give us a bit more, that would be amazing.
Sure. So if you want to check out more about the book, you can go to getenergizebook.com. That's Energize with a Z. And on there, you can see the various options of where you can purchase a copy. I will say that if you pre-order it, there will be the bonus of joining a community that I will be launching soon around the book. So that will have early access for those pre-ordering. If you did want to connect afterwards and reach out for any questions, I would suggest Instagram and LinkedIn are the best places. On Instagram, I'm on @Simon Alexander O. And you can just search Simon Alexander Ong on LinkedIn and you will find me there. I do respond to my messages. It may not be straight away, but it will be me that will get back to you. And that's something I want to stress because I do read every question, every message, and I always want to make sure I give you some time in my response.
Awesome. Simon, thank you so much for sharing this space with us today, man. It's been a, I don't want to use the word mindfuckery, but it's amazing as always.
Thank you so much, Massimo. Thank you so much, Tobias, for having me on.
Thank you, Simon. Lots of love. All the best on the journey.